Zambe na komitunaka o, Yahweh na komitunaka o, poso mwindo e utande wapi o, poso mwindo e utande wapi o, koko na biso ya kala ye nani ye.
Welcome to Nzuko 2025 Africa Week. Greetings from Ghana, a small island called by that name by its first people, and renamed Montserrat by its colonizers. A place still on the fringe of the British Empire. We are an overseas territory in the Caribbean, an overseas territory of the United Kingdom. Africans were first enslaved here in the early 17th century. Our current population is roughly 4,000. Most of our people have been displaced by a massive volcanic eruption which began in 1995. Okay. We are a beautiful, proud, brilliant, resilient African people. And I'm pleased to be chairing this celebration of Africanness. Marcus Garvey charged us to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. And another Caribbean brother, Franz Fanon, laid this out in his idea of self-sovereignty. He charged us to claim agency in a world surrounded by colonial power. And through this means, we will release our inner splendor. Brothers and sisters, I anticipate that that's exactly what we will do today. And in order to welcome you, I'm going to ask Professor Collins Nzuko to do that. Professor Collins, could I say something about you before you start?
Please.
Okay, then. So Dr. Collins Nzuko is a patron of the Africa Forum. And Collins Nzuko was the first naturalized Belgian to be elected to political office in West Flanders. He retired from political activities in December 2024 after serving 3 consecutive terms as councillor of Ostend City Council, a former chief executive and chairman of Nigerians in diaspora in Europe. Collins has been active in consultancy and advocacy in the field of socioeconomic development for Nigeria and for Africa in general. He's a fellow of both the Chartered Institute of Public Management of Nigeria and the Institute of Management Consultants, a 2014 awardee of a doctorate in governance, honoris causa. Is also a distinguished fellow of the International Association of Research Scholars and Administrators, where he serves in its governing council. Welcome, Dr. Collins Nzuko.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for that introduction. Much appreciated. Now, I guess the whole idea is for me to now, dig into the main meat of my brief, which is to provide opening remarks. I understand I have 10 minutes to do that, so without further ado, I'm going to, dig straight into it. Distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Pierre O. Lumumba, honorable guests, esteemed speakers, articulate moderator, dear fellow Africans and friends of Africa, good day and welcome to Nzuko 2025. This is a special gathering that holds profound meaning as we commemorate Africa Week. At the Africa Fora, the traditional Africa Day is one that not only marks our historical journey towards political independence, but it also invites sober reflections on the future we must shape together. This perhaps explains the reason it became more than just a day event for us at the Africa Forum. It is fittingly a week-long event. And today marks the beginning of that week-long event. As patron of the Africa Forum, it is both an honor to me and a solemn duty to open this important event that has become an annual ritual for as long as I can remember. Now, the Africa Forum as convener is not merely creating a platform for discourse. We are, together with you all, nurturing a Pan-African consciousness grounded in truth, dignity, and unapologetic ownership of our destiny. The theme for Nzuko 2025, which is sovereignty and independence of African states, compels us to go beyond the celebratory echoes of the 1960s liberation. It dares us to interrogate whether the political flags we hoisted back then have truly translated into sovereign agency, economically, mentally, diplomatically, and culturally. In this audience today, we gather not to romanticize history, but to confront it. To question history and to forge the next chapter with clarity and courage. Have we truly secured the freedom for which our forebears paid the ultimate price? Or have we inherited symbols without substance, flags without power, anthems without autonomy? These are the core questions. It is in this context that we are deeply honored to have as our keynote speaker a towering Pan-Africanist, a voice of moral clarity, a man whose intellectual fire continues to illuminate dark corners of complacency, and that is no other than Professor Pierre O. Lumumba. Now, if you permit me, I would like to share a personal reflection. Professor Lumumba obtained his doctorate in Ghent, just a stone's throw from where I speak to you from today. Belgium has been home to me for the past 3 decades. It was for him, as it was for him briefly. So for the past 3 decades, Belgium has been my home. For Professor Lumumba, it was briefly his home. Now, I cherish that commonality that he and I share, but with that shared connection comes both a burden, but also a blessing. We both live in the reality of Belgium's complex legacy in Africa, a legacy that includes the imperial sabotage that silenced the original Lumumba, Patrice Emery Lumumba, whose name our keynote speaker proudly bears and honors in his long-lasting commitment to African freedom. Belgium was complicit in the violent erosion of a visionary leader. Yet today, from this very soil, I join you as patron of Africa Fora to echo his vision anew. In doing so, I am undaunted and unapologetic. Dear Professor Lumumba, your presence here today is not just symbolic, it is restorative. You remind us that Africa's intellectual sovereignty must match its political aspirations. The Africa Forum salutes your courage, your eloquence, and your steadfastness in reminding us that independence without sovereignty is illusion. Yours is a voice of prophetic clarity in these complex times. You are a true Pan-African luminary whose words consistently summon us to abandon complacency and reclaim the moral and intellectual sovereignty of Africa. Your body of work continues the legacy of your namesake, Patrice Emery Lumumba. Today, the flame burns in those like you, Professor, who speak truth to power and provoke action where silence once reigned. The Africa Forum and Nzuko 2025 are proud to receive your light. We are equally privileged by the presence of a remarkable lineup of thinkers and doers. I begin with Sheba Monserrat, whose work on mental sovereignty reminds us that the colonization of the mind must be the last frontier to be deconstructed. Dr. Martin Ejidike, who will walk us through African diplomacy and development amidst the tremors of shifting global power dynamics. Benoit Faith, who courageously explores what's left of the Lumumba's vision. A question we must ask ourselves if we truly claim Pan-African lineage. Dr. Abubakar Ba, offering a global approach to the challenges of sovereignty because Africa does not operate in a vacuum and neither do its struggles. Chinwe Abuwa, addressing health systems financing, the bedrock of a continent's well-being and a true test of independence in the era of pandemics and donor dependence. And Trevor Gabali Palosio, who will stretch our thinking on autonomy and self-determination in the African diaspora, a timely exploration as diasporic Africans seek rootedness without erosion. I also want to acknowledge our able moderator, Honorable Dr. Veni Benz, from the beautiful island of Montserrat, who could have been prouder. And just imagine the way she stated what the island is, and I'm already feeling like taking a holiday. Worthy of singling out is the founder of the Africa Forum, our convener, an uncommon visionary thinker, quiet and unassuming doer, Wilfred Uloako Gayat. Let me simply say, Madam, thank you for all you do for Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Nzuko means gathering in Igbo language. But in the deepest cultural sense, it signifies a gathering of minds and spirits to deliberate on matters of urgent common concern. That is exactly what we are here to do. And let us do so with honesty, intellectual rigor, and a sense of shared purpose. As we begin this day of reflection and challenge, let us remind ourselves, Africa's sovereignty is not a gift granted, but a tax reclaimed. We may not all agree on the path, but we must not waver on the goal. A sovereign, dignified, united, and prosperous Africa. I thank you for your presence. I thank you for your commitment. Let Nzuko 2025 begin. Long live the spirit of Africa. Long live African sovereignty. Long live the Africa Forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Collins Nweke. Let Nzuko 2025 begin. And now we turn our attention to our keynote speaker, and mine is the distinction of presenting the bio of a man who has reached the dark corners of complacency, as said by Dr. Collins Nzuko. And I can't believe it that I have this opportunity to meet this giant in this way. I've heard him all over social media, and I still can't believe that I am going to be presenting his bio. And so Professor P.L.O. Lumumba is a professor of public law, a holder of an LLD, a Doctor of Laws, on the laws of the sea from the University of Ghent, Belgium. He holds a Master of Laws degree and a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Nairobi. He's an advocate of the High Courts of Kenya and Tanganyika and a certified mediator. Fellow of the Institute of Certified Public Secretaries of Kenya, a fellow of the Kenya Institute of Management, and honorary fellow of the African Academy of Science. He is chairman of Farafina Investment Group, Liberia, Economic Strategies, Growth and Development Initiatives for Africa, Nigeria, and Professor Lumumba is the immediate past director and CEO, Kenya School of the Law, and a former director of the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission. He's the founding trustee of the African Institute for Leaders and Leaders and founding chairman of the Association of the Citizens Against Corruption, among others. Brothers and sisters, let us welcome resoundingly Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, our keynote speaker.
Unfortunately, Professor Lumumba is having some technical issues. Sorry.
Okay. So should we go on to the next speaker until that is?
Yes, please. Apologies.
Okay. So now, I am absolutely proud. I'm proud as a Montserratian to be introducing another person from this beleaguered rock. And if you hear my proudness, it's because there are so few of us on the earth that when we get the chance to introduce the island and any other member, that we fall off our chairs. So put your hands together for Sheba Montserrat.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. What a delight. I have to, first of all, thank, well, of course, I have to big up Montserrat. So my name is Sheba Montserrat. And I usually say when I perform that they named the island after me. But I won't say that this time. I'm a proud child of Montserrat. Now, I have to say a thank you to Winifred for inviting me. And I am so honored to be amongst such wonderful, wonderful orators. So my paper or my presentation is called Mental Independence and Sovereignty. Contemporary forums on independence and sovereignty are mainly debated from the perspective of African nations developing autonomy, identity, and agency of their own countries after the mass carnage brought about by Europeans in the name of colonialism. Whilst we debate reinstating Africa's pride, power, and prestige, let's not forget the independence and sovereignty of the mind, a crucial yet overlooked topic. The power of language and the use of words are far more than tools for communication. They help to shape our perceptions, our beliefs, and social dynamics. Words have the potential to uplift, heal, and transform, but they can also be misused to perpetuate stereotypes, reinforce societal biases, and maintain inequality. Africa and her diaspora often unconsciously express words which carry racist undertones, cultural connotations, and historical injustice. Words which continue to uphold and promote notions of European superiority and thus African inferiority. European culture, the so-called West, is very efficient at storytelling. The ability to place European culture up front and center of global history and heroify how they got there is indeed a great talent. To address the cultural misuse of words requires a commitment to awareness and an intentionality to recognize and dismantle these destructive spoken word structures of European superiority. I have an initiative, a vision, a movement. I call it the Watch Your Mouth campaign. I shall repeat it. I call it the Watch Your Mouth campaign. In the first instance, Africa and her diaspora need to watch their mouth and monitor their words when they speak of all things connected to the so-called transatlantic slave trade. Oops, silly me. I'm watching my mouth. So instead of transatlantic slave trade, I would say the transatlantic trafficking of Africans. But let's examine that term, the transatlantic slave trade. The word trade neatly sanitizes the truth of the physical, mental, and emotional trauma caused to human beings. The term transatlantic slave trade is the first step in dehumanizing Africans by putting commerce above human suffering. The transatlantic trafficking of Africans puts not just people, but Africans first, indicating why you have to watch your mouth. What about that very common phrase? They took slaves out of Africa. I'm going to repeat that. What about that very common phrase? They took slaves from Africa. When Africans were trafficked into enslavement, not a single slave was taken from Africa. When Africans were trafficked into enslavement, not a single slave was taken from Africa. What they took was fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, thus tearing families apart. They took dancers, drummers, poets, artists, and griots. They took people who were healthy, unhealthy, simple, learned, solemn, joyful. They took Africans full of dreams who were brave or timid. They took smiles, scowls, laughter, hope, and aspirations, all wrapped in melanated skin, a skin designed to receive and honor the sun, a skin that would become their badge of shame as they entered into a black and white life flowing with ongoing humiliation and ceaseless terrorism. And let's not forget, on arrival to the Americas, Africans were still not slaves. They were enslaved. When investigations into modern day slavery explain the situation of those who were trafficked, they refer to their oppressors as captors, jailers, or imprisoners. Why then do we still use the term slave master? Slave master. Let no individual ever be deemed the master of another human being. In the face of any major uprisings, military forces would be swiftly dispatched to the Caribbean to quash the freedom fighters focused on liberation. it was not just plantation owners, but also nations who were active in holding Africans in captivity. There's no such thing as a slave master. Africans who managed to escape from the brutality of plantation life are commonly referred to as runaway slaves. When you watch your mouth, you will call them self-liberators, thereby being mindful not to regurgitate the documented tales of the oppressor over the upliftment of the voiceless. We must never forget that history is not static. We can change history with facts. White supremacist ideology lounges not in the shade, but in plain sight of the languages of Europeans who willingly went into competitive battles to subdue and dominate nations around the world, to satisfy their greed and what seems to be an envy of sunshine, seasoning, and sugar. As the late great reggae musician Bob Marley sang, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. I suggest that the best way to start liberating our minds is to watch your mouth. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheba Montserrat. And as Marcus Garvey said, and Bob Marley sang, we must liberate ourselves from mental slavery. And yeah, I know that there are questions. We are asking the questions to be held, but I cannot do other than to applaud you for your Watch Your Mouth campaign. I think that that's something we need to take on. And the fact that often in the discourse, we forget about the decolonization of the mind as encouraged by Fanon. And in keeping with the music that we had at the beginning that raised questions of Blackness and so on, I just need to tell our audience that you are following in the footsteps of Stokely Carmichael, who brought us Black Power, Kwame Ture, who is a son of Montserrat. His mother is from Montserrat, just above the hills that I am now sitting, his people. And so we continue. The discourse is enriched by our presence, even though we are on the margins. And so keep your questions going. And we now have to speak to us Dr. Martin Ejidike. And Dr. Martin, could you mind me saying a few words about you? Okay, thank you. So I present your bio. A seasoned international human rights and political affairs expert with over 30 years of experience across different UN agencies. The Organization for Security and Cooperation of Europe and Boltzmann Institute for Menschenrecht and Wien, Austria. He has worked extensively in human rights, governance, conflict prevention, and peace building, supporting UN missions and multilateral diplomacy at the UN General Assembly, Human Rights Council, and the UN Security Council. Dr. Ejidike is a senior political affairs officer and chief responsibility to protect at the UN Office on Genocide Prevention and the responsibility to protect and lead strategies on atrocity prevention while managing intergovernmental relations and office operations. As senior human rights advisor in Nigeria, he integrated human rights into the UN development and humanitarian programming and led interagency coordination. He also established 2 UN human rights field offices in Liberia and Uganda, and designed regional crisis response programs in East and Southern Africa. Welcome, Dr. Martin Ejidike, and we are going to give him an roaring welcome as it is with Nzuko 2025. Welcome.
Mr. Ejidike,
Okay,
you're muted.
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's an honor to join this platform, especially after the insight from Sheba Montserrat on the reinterpretation of the historiography of the slave trade. Today, I'll speak on the theme enhancing African diplomacy and development in a changing global context. This is not just a moment of disruption, it's also a moment of possibility if we choose to act strategically. Trump's re-election in 2025 has consolidated his America First approach, rooted in nationalism, unilateralism, and transactionalism. For Africa, this signals shrinking aid, fragile trade partnerships, and reduced space in multilateral diplomacy. In January, Executive Order 14169 suspended U.S. foreign aid for 90 days. Critical programs like PEPFAR are now under threat, despite saving over 25 million lives since 2003. Moreover, the U.S. State Department's Bureau of African Affairs faces restructuring, raising alarms about America's long-term diplomatic commitment to the continent. This erosion of traditional U.S.-Africa engagement creates a vacuum. The question before us is, therefore, how can Africa convert disruption into agency? 4 key challenges stand out: aid cuts and historical vulnerabilities, trade uncertainty, resource-driven conflict, and shifting global alliances. Cuts to PEPFAR could cause 60 to 74,000 additional HIV-related deaths in Africa by 2030. In South Africa alone, over 8,000 health workers have been laid off due to PEPFAR's withdrawal. With only 2 African states meeting the Abuja Declaration target of 15% health budget allocation, our capacity to self-fund is deeply constrained. In 2023, 34 African countries spent more on debt service than on healthcare and or education. In Sudan, debt repayments are more than 10 times higher than health spending. This is not sustainable, nor is it ethical. AGOA, Africa's flagship trade agreement with the United States, expires this year. Its future remains uncertain. For many countries, particularly in textiles and agriculture, this could destabilize vital export sectors. Africa's resources, particularly cobalt, lithium, and rare earths, are now central to U.S. strategic interests. But without proper governance, these resources risk fueling geopolitical competition and internal conflicts, as seen in the DRC-Rwanda tensions, the conflict in Sudan, and several conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa. As U.S. engagement retreats, China and Russia are rapidly expanding. China offers infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative. Russia's security partnerships and military presence both present fewer governance conditions, but also carry long-term dependencies. The danger here is not engagement itself, but becoming pawns in great power rivalries. Africa must strengthen its negotiation capacity and foreign policy coordination to maintain sovereignty. So how do we respond? Africa must institutionalize health sovereignty through the Africa Center for Disease Control and the proposed African Pandemic Sovereign Fund. During COVID-19, we were the last in line for life-saving treatments like Paxlovid. Efforts by India and South Africa to ensure removal of patents for these life-saving medication was unsuccessful. That cannot happen again. A regional pharmaceutical manufacturing and procurement system is not a luxury, it's a necessity. The African Union must lead collective negotiations for agro renewal. If that fails, Africa must deepen intra-African trade through the African Continental Free Trade Area. A fragmented bilateral approach only weakens African leverage. I mean, you can imagine a country like Rwanda or even DRC negotiating trade with the United States, and what difference it would make if Africa as a group negotiates the same agreement. We must move beyond extractive deals towards regional pacts on beneficiation and governance, so we own our value chains, not just the ground beneath our feet. US withdrawal from multilateral platforms gives Africa a chance to reclaim global space. We must intensify calls for UN Security Council reform, secure African representation, and lead in emerging domains like AI governance, digital equity, and cyber norms. Encouragingly, the AU's 2024 Continental AI Strategy sets a visionary precedent. So does the launch of Project Mufungi, Africa's first AI factory, led by Strive Musuyewa in partnership with NVIDIA. Above all, Africa must chart a non-aligned, interest-based posture. This means regional resilience, investment in African infrastructure, and a commitment to internal transformation rather than dependence on external powers. But we must be honest. This vision will remain aspirational without strong institutions. Many of Africa's most promising strategies falter, not because they are flawed, but because implementation is weak. Ministries are underfunded, coordination is poor, AU-led strategies often collapse at the national level. Elite capture, politicized bureaucracies, and democratic erosion all pose barriers to coherent diplomacy. Without reliable data systems, even our best negotiators are flying blind. Strategic autonomy must begin at home. This requires civil service reform, policy alignment, and investment in knowledge infrastructure. Of course, even the strongest institutions cannot function without adequate financing. Strategic autonomy requires not only policy reform, but also financial innovation. There are encouraging signs. Senegal is building Africa's first World Health Organization approved vaccine production facility. Rwanda is leading in digital public service delivery, and Botswana continues to set the bar in mineral governance. These examples show that where there is leadership and institutional clarity, African agency is not just possible, it's already underway. Africa must look inward and outward, mobilizing domestic resources while also tapping into tools like diaspora bonds, green finance, and the African Development Bank's high fives. The Liquidity and Sustainability Facility, backed by the Economic Commission for Africa and the Afrexim Bank, is a step towards easing Africa's debt burden on our own terms. Financing is not a side issue. It is the engine of our sovereignty. Colleagues, Trump's second term brings uncertainty, but it does not define Africa's destiny. We are not passive actors in a global drama. We are agents of our own future if we act with unity, vision, and resolve. As Thomas Sankara reminds us in his powerful words on debt, the debt must not be paid. If we do not pay the debts, the creditors will not die. This is certain. If we pay debts, we will die. The priority must be to save lives, preserve dignity, and reimagine debt and diplomacy, not as instruments of dependence, but as levers for transformation. Sankara reminds us that when debt repayment threatens lives, priorities must shift. This is not about winners and losers. It's about survival. Accommodations must be found between debtor and creditor, because no financial obligation is worth more than a human life. hearing the challenge of African diplomacy in a period of global transition. This is Africa's moment. Let us not merely survive the disruption. Let us lead through it. If we build with intention now, Africa won't just adapt to this global transition. We will shape what comes next. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin Ejidike, and I have to apologize for not announcing the title of your talk, which was Enhancing African Diplomacy and Development, Focused in a Changing Global Context. And thanks for urging us to acknowledge that we are not passive actors in a global drama, and that we must look inwards and as well as outwards, and for posing that important question: how can Africa construct destruction, convert destruction into agency? And I think we need to give Dr. Ejidike another round of applause, and we are very thankful for what you have delivered. And now we move on to Mr. Benoit Fate, and he's going to speak to us about what's left of the Lumumbist vision. And before we do that, and Benoit, should I say something about you? Is that okay? You're okay, Ben. He's leaving it up to me, and that's what I'm going to do. And he's a journalist for French-speaking Belgian public television, RTBF, where he covers news from the African continent. A graduate in Journalism and Development Corporation from the Université Libre de Brussels. He has been following social and political development in Central Africa in general, and the Democratic Republic of Congo in particular, for almost 30 years. He has also acquired expertise on the subject of Belgium's colonial past through several documentary films, Colonie 2000 and Lumumba, La Retour d'un Héros 2023. He also took part in the international survey, Rwanda Classified 2024, coordinated by Forbidden Stories on the repressive record of Paul Kagame's regime in Rwanda and abroad. Welcome, Benoit Fate.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers, allow me first to thank Africa Fora for inviting me to participate in this conference. It is truly a pleasure and an honor to be part of the panel you gathered today for this important event. As announced, I've chosen to title my talk today, Is Patrice Lumumba's Legacy Slowly Fading Away in DRC? This is in fact a question we studied in a documentary film made with my colleagues Quentin Noirfalis and Diodo Amadi on the return of Patrice Lumumba's remains 3 years ago. You may remember that in June 2022, Belgium finally returned to Congo the remains of the first Prime Minister of independent Congo. These remains were actually a tooth pulled out of Lumumba's dead body a few minutes after his assassination on January 17, 1961. This story was kept secret for a long time until an aging Belgian police officer began to boast about it. In 2000, in front of a television crew, the former Belgian police officer who served in Katanga in 1961 took the tooth of Patrice Lumumba out of a drawer and showed it to the camera. A scene of surreal cynicism, during which he shamelessly explained that he had pulled the tooth from Lumumba's dead body before cutting it into pieces, and made it all disappear forever in a barrel of acid with the bodies of Lumumba's comrades, Maurice Mpolo and Joseph Okito. A Belgian historian then filed a complaint against Soet, that was the name of the Belgian policeman, and the tooth was seized and remained for more than 20 years in the offices of the Brussels Palace of Justice before being officially returned to the Democratic Republic of Congo on the 22nd of June 2022 at the request of the Lumumba family. Before arriving in Kinshasa, the remains of the national hero toured the country, passing through Lumumba's native village in Sankuru province, Onalua, then Kisangani, the city where Lumumba began his political struggle, and finally Shilatembo, the place where he disappeared forever, deep in the Katanga bush. At each stop, many local elected officials were present, as well as one of the highest-ranking government officials, the President of the National Assembly in Onalua, the President of the Senate in Kisangani, the Prime Minister in Shilatembo, and finally the President himself in Kinshasa. All of this undoubtedly demonstrates that the figure of Patrice Lumumba is still alive in Congo. But unfortunately, everything suggests that his story and his struggle are today the subject of cynical political exploitation. Let's take a moment to revisit Lumumba's political project. A project defined in a famous speech you're probably all familiar with, the one he delivered looking King Baudouin in the eye on June 30, 1960, the Congolese Independence Day. This speech was organized in two chapters, so to speak. The first was a frank reminder of colonial oppression, a racist system of exploitation of men, women, and the country's wealth, whose objective was the enrichment of the metropolis. This part of the speech is probably the most famous, but the second part of the speech is equally important, because that's where Lumumba explained his political project to the world. I quote the excerpts that seem most important to me. We will establish social justice together and ensure that everyone receives fair compensation for their work. We will show the world that the black man, what the black man can do when he works in freedom, and will make the Congo the center of influence for all of Africa. We will ensure that the lands of our homeland truly benefit its children. We will review all the laws of the past and create new ones that will be just and noble. We will put an end to the oppression of free thought and ensure that all citizens fully enjoy the fundamental freedoms provided for in the Declaration of Human Rights. We will effectively eliminate all discrimination of any kind and give everyone the rightful place that their human dignity, their work, and their dedication to their country deserve. End of quote. So, what remains of all this today? Not much, I'm afraid. Let's remember that the MNC, the party created by Patrice Lumumba, does not have a single elected member of parliament today. And unfortunately, social justice still does not exist in Congo, where the vast majority of the population still lives in extreme poverty, while its political and economic elites live in opulence. Patrice Lumumba's nephew, Jean-Jacques Lumumba, recently reminded us that Congolese members of parliament are today the highest paid in the world, earning a salary of nearly $20,000 per month, while 75% of the population lives on less than $2 a day. Corruption has almost become the norm, from the lowest civil servant, poorly paid or not paid at all, who tries to take advantage of his position to earn a few dozen or hundreds of dollars, to the highest levels of government stealing millions. 65 years after independence, the Congo's immense wealth still does not benefit to the Congolese population. It is the Congolese elite, Western and Chinese multinationals and neighboring countries that exploit Congolese minerals. Respect for human rights is non-existent. Journalists, members of civil society, opposition figures, and ordinary citizens are imprisoned, sometimes murdered, in an obvious denial of justice. Lumumba wanted to fight against the balkanization of the country, against tribalism, but while the country is divided and looted by neighboring countries, ethnic and regional tensions are more present than ever, claiming new civilian victims every day. not only in areas occupied by foreign armies, but also in the west and the center of the country where local armed groups fight each other. Lumumba presented himself as a nationalist, but his nationalism was a struggle for the Congo's independence from external predators, primarily Western ones. Today, faced with the Congolese army's inability to defend the territory because it is also deeply corrupt at the top and poorly paid at the bottom, the country's wealth is being offered to Donald Trump, whose capitalist, racist, and fascist policies are precisely what Lumumba wanted to fight against. All thus in exchange for protection of the power in place against the AFC M23 military aggression supported by Rwanda. Lumumba had a Pan-African vision. He wanted the Congo and its wealth to become the center of influence for an Africa freed from colonial and Western tutelage. But this ideal has now been replaced by xenophobic rhetoric, where politicians boast of being Congolese from father and mother to hide the absence of a coherent political project, with the risk of ultra-nationalist excesses that we have seen elsewhere on the continent, particularly in Ivory Coast, and this could end in new pogroms. To be very clear with you, no one embodies Patrice Lumumba's thinking on the Congolese political scene today, but almost everyone claims to be inspired by it. In Kinshasa, Patrice Lumumba has a boulevard in his name, a statue, and even a mausoleum since the ceremonies of his return. But this celebration is merely a facade. The best example of this is that Patrice Lumumba Mausoleum was recently looted without anyone defending it. Symbolically, this looting speaks volumes about what the Congolese elites have done with their national hero's legacy. So, who's responsible for all this? The primary responsibility obviously lies with Patrice Lumumba's assassins, Belgium, its King Baudouin, and its government, who planned and carried out the assassination of Patrice Lumumba with the complicity of the United States. They were the ones who wanted to kill Lumumba's political project because they had no desire for the Congo to truly become independent and for the country's wealth to return to the Congolese people after having exploited them for 80 years. They were the one who fomented the secession of Katanga at the time and arranged for Lumumba to be assassinated there. They were the ones who placed a bloodthirsty dictator in power instead of the prime minister elected by the Congolese people, who would continue to serve their interests for decades after Congo's independence. All this with total impunity, since it must be remembered that to date, no one has ever been convicted or even prosecuted for this assassination. It's a safe bet that these foreign predators will not abandon their plan. As you know, states have no friends, they only have interests. From this cynical political reality, we can only draw one lesson. The Congolese can only count on themselves to free themselves from these manipulators. The tragedy, as I recall today, is that the Congolese are also manipulated by their own elites, who also pursue only their own interests. It should of course be recalled that for 30 years, the Congo has been prey to exploitation by new predators, aggression, massacres, perpetrated by Rwanda in particular, all with the complicit silence of the international community. But this reality cannot obscure the responsibility of the Congolese elites themselves. As a friend of Congo and Africa, as an anti-colonial, anti-neo-colonial activist, I must also underline this reality. It is shared by many of my colleagues' friends, Congolese friends, intellectuals, civil society actors, and courageous journalists who keep Lumumba's political thought alive by fighting every day for social justice in a country and in a world that is more than ever prey to cynics and predators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benoit, Faith. And we are clapping, but I could speak for myself, and that is, I'm affected by the horror and terror that you described in the assassination of the Lumumba Project. And I think that all of us need to take a deep breath in and Breathe out. Probably you need to take more than one breath, because the loss that is implied is tremendous. And it might well be modeled in other African territories. And so while we say that we are looking on inwards to ensure our present day sustenance and future sustenance, we need to examine the impact of terror on the way we think and act. And this is beyond the terror that was created and horror that was created by the colonial captors. So I'm just left very tired in hearing all of this. And this is the nature of what we are doing, in that it will leave us tired, because the journey, the struggle has been constant, and it seemed to be going on for too long. So let's thank you again. And I think at the heart of it is the thing about liberating ourselves from mental slavery, and the thing about self-sovereignty. And thank you very much. So we move on, and questions are going to be raised later. We move on to Dr. Abu Bakar Bah, and who will speak to us about Africa since independence, a global approach to the challenge of sovereignty. Dr. Bah, are you ready? Yes, Dr. Bah, are you ready? And let me just say a few words about you before you present. Dr. Abu Bakar Bah is Presidential Research Professor of Sociology and Department Chair at Northern Illinois University. He's the founding director of the Institute for Research and Policy Integration in Africa, and faculty associate at the Center for Nonprofit and NGO Studies. Professor Bah is also founding editor-in-chief of African Conflict and Peacebuilding Review and African editor of Critical Sociology. He's a recipient of the 2014 and 2016 Carnegie Foundation African Diaspora Fellowships, the 2012 Council of American Overseas Research Centers, and Multi-Country Research Fellowship, the 2017 United Nations Peace Nexus Grant, and the 2015 Outstanding International Educator Award at NIU. Most recently, he was awarded the prestigious Presidential Research Scholarship and Artistry Professorship at NIU. He has published several articles. Welcome, Dr. Abu Bakar Bah. Thank you very much for what you will present.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. So thank you very much, all of you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I guess to continue the spirit, and also to be among such a distinguished group of people. I'm going to continue just with a little bit some of the themes that have been, I guess, raised here, and the title of my talk is Africa's Independence and a Global Approach to Sovereignty. And again, I want to emphasize the word global. This is a concept that I've been working on. Well, I know in the program it says global, but it's global. And as an academic scholar, I've been working on this for some time. So I walk you through mostly kind of like an academic kind of kind of discourse, but also hopefully it will also steer a way for us to think about the practical issues. So I think the first question that we have to really ask is, what is sovereignty? And it's really an important question because it's very easy to actually run into legal definitions. But in the academic literature, I mean, we talk of state sovereignty and sovereignty of the people. And that second part is that is the sovereignty of the people. The way it actually goes ultimately will determine how much sovereignty a state actually has in the international system. Or another way to put it is that if a state actually doesn't accord its people sovereignty, they will end up being actually a very mismanaged, poor, oppressive state, which will make it weak in the international system. And as such, it will really not have much sovereignty. So I just want to flag this, concepts of state sovereignty and sovereignty of the people. And I will talk about sovereignty, especially of the state. Ultimately, it's a question of leverage. How much sovereignty a country has or a state has in the international system, it's a matter of leverage. As we know, I mean, all countries are interdependent in some ways, but the level of dependency or lack of, comes really to how much leverage you have, and the bigger your leverage, the more sovereignty you have, and the less leverage you have, the less sovereignty you do. And to understand African sovereignty, we have to go back to independence, that is to the event of independence in the 1960s or so. Because in a sense, that's where the discourse of African sovereignty kind of like rests. But I think we have to understand, what is the context and the forces that propel African independence. That is independence, as handing Europeans living and Africans kind of continue and so forth. One thing that I really like to note, very important, is that independence, that is the event that occurred, was not really a restoration of sovereignty, but simply an affirmation of colonially created multi-ethnic countries. There we know really so independent didn't mean, okay, well, we had a country, let's say, for example, DRC or Sierra Leone, anything, and we just they're regaining their sovereignty. No. What we actually call sovereignty, or what we call independence, was essentially the creation of new colonially multi-ethnic colonial countries. And that is not the same as the restoration of sovereignty. And the challenge of sovereignty or the lack of leverage goes back to the character of those countries. And of course, what will happen within them. And the key point really is that those countries that were created there, they lacked cultural cohesion. And that is a key ingredient in fostering the idea of nation out of post-colonial state. So at best, really, what we have was simply countries. We had countries. And in that process of independence, we get a catastrophic disconnection. And that is a disconnection between country, state, and nation. For you to actually gain sovereignty, you have to have a symbiosis of all of these three things. A country is just a territory with some kind of borders on a map. A state is a political power within a given space that may be legitimate or not legitimate. And a nation is actually a culture. It's a connection among people. And states or countries actually become, serious and meaningful when there's a state that is legitimate and also that state enjoys a sense of nationhood. When you're robbed of that, or when you don't have that, you end up actually having problematic countries. So, in a way, I mean, independence was just an administrative act that gave administrative autonomy, so to speak, to Africans. But it really didn't give policy autonomy, actually due to dependence. So when you say A, B, C country are independent, it really means that just they are like the administrative of day-to-day things, but it didn't really translate into policy autonomy. So all those things that we hear about Lumen and others, again, they couldn't really do them because of lack of, dependency in one way or the other. So to move, how do we move from independence to sovereignty? And this is actually something that, scholars, the earlier generation of African scholars, Ali Masri and others, they know that during that time, they did know that actually independence doesn't really equate to sovereignty and all those things. So if you read the literature on that, you will see that very much. And also this raises another question, that is, are we talking of the sovereignty of Africa, or are we talking of the sovereignty of African countries? And those are not one and the same thing, but it's important to note, these nuances. So in a way, I mean, again, skipping a lot of history or things that we all know, but what independence and the decades that follow, what they really produced was what we would call strong states, but weak countries. And let me qualify a little bit. When I say weak, strong states, I don't really mean in the interstate system. I mean that they are strong vis-a-vis their people because they are oppressive. In other words, the authoritarian state is strong vis-a-vis its people because it can oppress them. But actually, those are weak countries because they have no leverage in the international system. So you really have, kind of bullies that get bullied outside, and that's really not good for us. But this is really the reality of what we have of most African countries: strong internally as oppressors, but weak outside, and as such, they have no leverage. So let me go to the question: where do African countries have leverage, or what is the leverage of African countries? Because again, to talk of sovereignty really means to talk of leverage. Unfortunately, I mean, there's not really much, but there are two, there are two areas. One is Africans and African people. We do have more moral capital when it comes to questions of colonialism, social justice, and so forth, because we have lived the pains. So we, many good, meaningful people will listen when Africans talk. We do have a moral capital, and that story actually needs to be told and retold and retold. But it's a leverage, but it can only take us so far if we're also doing the right things. And the second area of leverage is natural resources. Again, all of these are very weak leverage, but we do have natural resources that the world needs. But unfortunately, I mean, we are really not being able to translate that natural resources into leverage. For one, I mean, it's under the ground. We don't even know we have the resources, except somebody come and tells us that we have the resource. That is how, technologically problematic it is. But granted, I mean, as Martin was speaking, these are like things that African countries can use as some leverage to begin with. But ultimately, the question is, where do African countries lack leverage? And the list is long, but to just group it in very broad terms: security, trade, and governance. All of those are areas, and these are like big chunk where really we lack leverage. The security of African people and African states is practically not in our hands. Trade, we don't define it. Governance, we didn't even select the forms of government of government. That's how problematic it is. So all of these are areas in which we lack leverage. Now, what is limiting the leverage of African people? And this, again, I won't take you through the scholarly things, but in my scholarly work, I talk of the locality of things. And by locality, I really mean it's a concept that I developed in which I try to bring in the external and the domestic factors in understanding African realities. So it is neither just, okay, well, hey, colonialism and whatnot and so forth, but also needed. So in a sense, it's a combination of these external and domestic dynamics that actually produces the African reality. And I'll skip to the external part of it. Of course, have been said: the world capitalist system, colonialism, those are things that we know. Now, on the domestic side of things, of course, we know poor governance. We know those things, and the lack of what I call constitutionally representative democracy. That is to say, the need for creative institutional designs. And by really that, what I mean is a political system that takes into account ethnic and regional representation and also create limited power. In a sense, I mean, these are areas that are fundamentally lacking. And what it does, again, it leads to the lack of people's sovereignty, which leads to poor governance, which leads to economic underdevelopment, which creates weak states in the international system. So just some few takeaway, African sovereignty, that is when we talk of African sovereignty, must begin with sovereignty of the people. And that is actually what can lead to better forms of governance rooted in constitutional representative democracy. What I mean by constitutional representative democracy is that one of the biggest lies that African people have been told is that democracy is one person, one vote. That is one of the biggest lies. If you look at many countries that have a history of democracy, they do not have one person, one vote. That is not in the United States. That's not in Germany, Belgium, Uganda. No. There's always some kind of way in which you actually accommodate so that you don't have the oppression of the majority or something like that. So in a sense, so it is true that democracy is about representation and limiting government power, but you have to ask, who are you representing and who are the people? And in the African reality, because of the nature of African states, the people are ethnic and regional groups. If you do not create ethnic or regional representation, you will end up actually having abnormal political system, because individual representation doesn't really lead to the kind of cultural representation that we need in African states. So this is what I mean by constitutional representative democracy. Again, I've written about this many in my work, so but we can talk about it. So to arrive at this, some few things, again, not a blueprint. I don't have all the answers. But I think the first and foremost, we need a radical rethinking about multi-ethnic country and the political representation of people. We need a radical rethinking. We cannot, just democracy and whatnot. Every country has to be designed. Every political system has to be designed, and it has to be designed based on actually what are the problems and the needs of the people and where you want to arrive at. So that is something that is actually fundamental in that should be fundamental in African discourses. We need to go beyond colonialism arguments to foster much more cohesive and strong states. Colonialism is a historic injustice, it is true, but if we get stuck in it, we'll never pass it. Again, as Mandela always say, you don't have to forget, but certainly you have to move forward. And two things I want to just point as thought-provoking kind of things. I think to think of African countries, in my view, I think we need to move towards more decentralized and local governance systems within a Pan-African system. I don't mean, the earlier Pan-Africans, we think we'll take out all the African states, make one country. That's just going to create one big mega problem. But I think in each African country, if we begin to decentralize and begin to actually put autonomy and local fiscal decentralization within communities, within small groups, then people can actually control the affairs, and the state that is actually colonially oppressive state can actually become less and less significant. I think for me, decentralization is very important, but also it has to be within a Pan-African system where, people have a freedom of movement across Africa and freedom to settle. You should go and live anywhere in Africa that you want, no problem. As long as we focus on decentralization, I think that can take us a long way. The last point I want to make is about rent from minerals. One of the biggest problems why we do have the oppressive African political system is very simple. African economies are, mineral-based. The economy is 70-80% mineral-based revenue. It goes into the hand of a state, and of course, corruption will happen. My thought is that what about if every African country can actually get to the point where they say every single penny from minerals should not be used to fund a government. It should be placed in a fund to only do development projects, period. Do not pay civil servants, presidents, or whatever it is with money from minerals. If you want to pay them, tax the people. Use taxes to run the government. And my belief is that if you tax people, you will be responsible to them. But use mineral revenues only for development purpose. When you use minerals to fund governments, you create a mega corruption because you have a state that controls 90% of the economy and it goes into the pocket of somebody. So somehow I think these are just some few things, again, to go back to the point, we only build leverage if we actually create sovereignty of the people. And the only sovereignty of the people happens if we really move towards a much more constitutionally representative forms of representation on democracy. Thank you very much. I hold it from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abubakar Ba. And we have heard that African sovereignty must begin with the people, but we also heard that there are problematics, and independence, sovereignty, those definitions, and how and what that means to the countries, issues around democracy, governance, leverage, freedom of movement, and mineral-based economies that are not managed in ways that would ensure democracy. We want to thank you very much, and we know that there'll be many questions later. And so let us give Dr. Abubakar Ba a round of applause. Thank you. And it appears that we will not have, well, as yet, we would not have Professor Lumumba because of technical difficulties. So we move on now to Chinwe Abua. And Chinwe Abua will speak to us on the feature of health systems in Africa. Welcome, Chinwe.
Thank you, Dr. Banz. Good evening, everyone.
And I have a few things here to say about you. Is that okay?
Yes, please. I'm delighted. Thank you.
So Chinwe Abua is an economist and policy advocate with over a decade of experience in policy research, analysis, and strategic advocacy across Africa. She serves as a policy and advocacy officer of the One campaign, where she leads advocacy efforts focused on improving health systems, pandemic preparedness, and health financing in Nigeria and beyond. She has been instrumental in advocating for increased development finance to Africa, particularly for investments on high-impact sectors such as health, infrastructure, and economic development. Chinwe Abua also champions increased health financing and domestic resources mobilization to strengthen health systems and improve access to quality healthcare across Africa. She has worked as an economist with the Nigerian government, a Mandela Washington Fellow. She was recently appointed to the Advisory Council of the Africa Women and Children Conference, a platform that empowers women and youth and children within Africa's development agenda. She's the founder of Umama, a social enterprise providing postpartum support to new mothers across Africa. She holds a Master of International Business from Hull International Business School, among others. Welcome again, Chinwe Abua.
Thank you so much, Dr. Banz. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, depending on where you're joining from. It is indeed an honor to be part of Africa Fora's Nzuko 2025 Africa Week. And I want to thank the organizers for creating such an intentional space for us to gather, not just to reflect on where we're coming from, but to shape where we're going. I'm especially proud of the work that Africa Fora is doing to shift the African narrative, because last year we learned that Africa loses a lot of investments due to negative narratives around the continent. And I'm very excited to be part of these speakers to present bold ideas. And it is a privilege to learn from you all. So I work with One Campaign, and I'm going to give a bit of background. One is a global organization fighting for a more just world by securing the investments needed to create economic opportunities and healthier lives, because none of us are equal until all of us are. At One, our North Star is very clear around health. By 2035, every child born in Africa should have access to basic health care, clean water, and nutrition, so they can live long, productive lives and achieve their highest potential. This vision demands African-led health financing solutions and the unlocking of over $1 trillion in investments to drive inclusive growth. Basically, our vision is, as we've been hearing others speak about sovereignty, health financing must be led by Africans for Africa. So, but beyond the professional, health is very personal for me. I come from a family of doctors, but my parents are medical practitioners. My siblings are as well. And as a child, I would accompany my father, one of Nigeria's foremost public health specialists, on hospital visits across rural Nigeria. And I guess we can all say that those early experiences shaped me, because 2 decades later, I advocate for increased financing for health, not just as my job, but because I've seen the transformational power of strong health systems. Because really, when you invest in health, everything changes. You ensure that mothers survive childbirth, children reach their 5th birthdays, families avoid catastrophic out-of-pocket expenditure, students learn better, economies grow, and nations become more resilient. According to a 2024 Afrobarometer survey across 39 countries in Africa, health is the second most important issue Africans want their governments to address just after unemployment. So among the many reasons why we celebrate Africa Day, what I really value is the opportunity to reflect not just on our past, as the previous speakers have done, but also on the choices that will shape our future. So when we gather here today, I want to ask us, why is health critical to Africa's future? Why must universal health coverage stop being a dream and become everyone's lived reality? And it's because health is the cornerstone of strong economies. A healthy population is a productive, innovative, and resilient one. Without good health, people can't work, people can't learn, people can't build wealth. So the first shift I would like for us to make today is that health is not just a social good. It is really a smart economic strategy. Africa is at a demographic and development crossroads. By 2030, we will be home to 2.5 billion people. That means 1 in 4 people on Earth will be African by 2050. And 60% of this population is under 25. And everybody says, oh, it's the next frontier. We need to harness the demographic dividend. But this dividend is meaningless if we can't protect it and empower it. To illustrate, in 2023, health spending in Africa was $57 billion, compared to $2.3 trillion in Asia. As Dr. Martin mentioned, 34 African countries spent more on debt servicing than on health and education. And then in 2001, we had African leaders come together in Africa, in Nigeria, and came up with what we now call the Abuja Declaration, a commitment to allocate 15% of health budgets, of national budgets to health. But it's 2025, and so far, only 2 countries have ever met that target. So you look at the dynamics and we say, okay, we want to finance health as an economic driver, but we need to think of where health financing comes from. And on the continent, there are 3 key buckets. First, out-of-pocket expenditure. So people go to access healthcare at their community hospitals, at the general hospitals, and they pay out of pocket. Africa leads the world in this out-of-pocket expenditure. Individuals cover up to 37% of their health expenses out of pocket. And the WHO recommended is actually 20%. And let's bear in mind that this is an average across Africa, because in Nigeria, where I come from, out-of-pocket expenditure is as high as 70%. So World Economic Forum says 11 million people are pushed into poverty annually from out-of-pocket expenditure on health. Next financing bucket is government expenditure. How much does the government allocate to health? In Africa, governments contributed 41% in 2022 compared to 76% in Europe. What this means basically is an African health minister has $40 per person per year to pay for health for their citizens. Their counterparts in high-income countries manage $4,000 per person. So if you think about it realistically, with increasing non-communicable diseases, recurrent infectious diseases, you're left wondering, how much health can we really secure with $40? And the next component is external funding. So your PEPFAR, your Gavi, your ODA, and which come 2025, USAID funding cuts, UK is cutting funding, Germany, France, everybody is reducing aid. Our analysis at one shows that the recent cuts, if they continue, could lead to 4 million deaths annually. But it's not just a funding gap when you think of numbers, it's a lives lost gap. Is that the gains we've made in vaccinations, in HIV treatments, in maternal care, in emergency responses are being reversed. So the question is, where do we go from here? Because we're discussing, if you look at the history of the global World Health architecture, it really started as an economic mechanism. When we started trade, it was put in place to ensure that diseases didn't cross borders. And now we're left with the system that is crumbling before us. And it's easy to get into analysis paralysis when you look at the numbers and confusion. But I think that we need to act strategically, and we need to urgently shift towards health financing that is sustainable, that is equitable, and is owned by Africans. So at one, we've been holding a series of convening because, like I said earlier, our vision is that by 2035, every child born in Africa has access to basic healthcare, nutrition, and everything that they need. So we did a convening at the AU, we did a convening in Kigali, and in April, we convened African leaders, partners, and change makers at Bellagio. And the question was, we all know what the issues are. What are the actionable, concrete pathways to which we can sustainably finance domestic resource mobilization for health? And we came up with 6 concrete pathways, which I'd like to share. The first one was to scale up effective health taxes. We have rising disease burdens from non-communicable diseases. You see young people getting hypertension, cancer, and it's because of changing lifestyle and urbanization. So how do we protect our citizens while we're thinking of how to fund health? And health taxes are a good way to go. Some people might argue and say, well, you can't tax the people and the money is negligible. But our argument is, think of it as protecting the health of the citizens, really, because if you're able to discourage consumption, then you have less disease burden on the existing infrastructure. Secondly, unlock diaspora capital through transparent, credible mechanisms. We all know that the African diaspora is very strong, sending over 50 billion in remittances to the continent. And we think that we know that we can innovatively leverage these resources if our policymakers, insurance companies, and health technology companies come together, we can actively leverage these funds. Thirdly, we need to recognize health as an economic driver of jobs and growth. We need to start creating vaccines. 70% of our vaccines are imported. Like a previous speaker mentioned, when the COVID-19 hit, we realized that we couldn't access vaccines. The continent was the last to get access to vaccines. With the population that we have, we can strategically position ourselves to be trained to provide the health workforce for the global economy going forward. We can also create more fiscal space to reduce the continent's debt burden. But vis-a-vis doing this, we need to understand that health is political, and we need to get our leaders to commit to funding health. The Abuja Declaration should not be a dream in the future. It should be something that we are trying to activate realistically now. And we need to reform global health initiatives to reflect African priorities. And this may sound very high level, because I try to talk to my friends about it and they say, well, it's the government's job to provide health for its citizens. And realistically, it is by social contract. But one of the things I love about being African is our shared heritage and understanding of the power of community. The South Africans will say Ubuntu, I am because we are. And we must move beyond health being the government's responsibility to it becoming a collective responsibility. And what does a collective responsibility look like? Of course, we've established that the governments must lead. They must budget more, tax better, spend smarter, reduce foreign trips, as one of the ministers say, and purchases of vehicles. But our role as citizens really is that we must actively get involved to demand transparency, to participate in health governance, and to embrace prevention. Health begins at home. You have $40. With $40, you cannot provide health care for everybody, but you can provide health. So nutrition, systems, sanitation, those of us who are better off have the collective responsibility to get involved in our communities, to know how health is funded at the community level. In Nigeria, we have systems where people are able to adopt a primary healthcare center, and they're able to fund medicines and vaccines for people in the community. Insurance should also be something that we uptake, because most people say, I don't fall sick, so I don't need insurance. But again, it's a social contract that those who can afford it and those who are healthier should be able to fund health for those who are not. For donor partners, we need to come back to the drawing board to shift from control to collaboration. Donor partners need to fund what countries need, not what donors prefer, and they need to align with the already African priorities that exist. And for young people, because again, where I come from in Nigeria, there's this, everybody wants to japa, as they say. The dream is to grow up enough to afford to leave the continent. But I think we need to reverse that. We need to start innovating. We need to start showing up and understanding that the continent belongs to us. So in closing, I'm just going to say the era of heavy foreign aid is coming to an end, but this is not the end of the road. It's the beginning of African health sovereignty. And as we heard earlier, independence without sovereignty is an illusion. So I will borrow from my Yoruba brothers and say it is time for our leaders to jimasun, which means to rise and to prioritize health. It's time for our people to act collectively. Ubuntu reminds us, I am because we are. And it's time for our partners to work with us, not ahead of us. If we finance our future, our health like our future depends on it, then we'll build a system that is not just yes, I'm done.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank
Thank you. I know once we are talking health, we can talk forever. And we want to thank you for your contribution. Health as a smart economic strategy, and that has remained in my mind. And the fact that there needs to be a rethinking of health finances and health provision as part of the social contract needs to be thought through as well. So thank you very much. And I'm sure that there'll be questions later. And now I am welcoming another person from my part of the world. It's becoming such a wonderful thing today. Usually we are doing when we do things, we are doing it as one person. But here is Mr. Trevor Garibaldi Palacio, I think from Belize. Welcome, Mr. Palacio. Is he here?
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Loud and clear.
Yes,
And I hear that you're Garifuna.
Garifuna, man.
You're Garifuna from European St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And just yesterday, there was a wonderful celebration in St. Vincent of the spiritual Baptists who have designed their African form of worship and who were outlawed for nearly 100 years. But as part of Africa Week, the liberation came just a day or two, not yesterday, the day before. Anyway, I just want to say all of that to say that we are in the Africanness loop. And so you're coming by the way of Belize because the Garifuna originated in St. Vincent, and you have been in Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and the United States of America. And you currently reside in California, where you work as a real estate agent and serve as a community advocate for the homeless community. You're the president of the International Garifuna Council and Garifuna Heritage Chamber of Commerce, which are movements in formation to establish economic and civic empowerment throughout the Garifuna diaspora. They are currently focused on leadership development, which you look forward to learning from each of the speakers in order to take the information back home. So you must begin by telling us who the Garifuna are, Trevor Garibaldi Palacio.
And first and foremost, thank you for the space. In short, the Garifuna people are descendants of the original Africans on this side of the world, the Western Hemisphere. All over the Western Hemisphere, we've been here. And Ayano Hagid Nagarifuna, Ayano Hanagyu Nigumela. I still speak the ancient language of my ancestors that first got, maybe walked here, maybe don't know how they got here, but we're still here.
So I'm telling you, Mabrika.
Yes. We want to thank everyone, and this is apropos. The Garifuna people are a spiritually driven people who knew God before we were introduced to religare, religion. So the spirit is what guides us, and the spirit said, this is apropos. My name is Trevor Garibaldi Palacio, and Garibaldi means wind, air. In the Garifuna language, we got rid of our colonial name, which is Trevor Orlando Palacio. The ancestors said, get rid of that. Your ancient name is Garibaldi, wind. The title of our discussion are the differences between self-determination and autonomy. Greetings, all. Nzuko, which is a gathering of the minds, is described as Agambahani in the Garifuna language. Agambahani means a brainstorming and listening session. We want to thank God, Allah, Jehovah, Bungu, the Most High, for this opportunity to share our thoughts with you about the future of Mother Al-Kebula, Africa, and her posterity at home and abroad. Thank you, fellow speakers, Africa Fora, Sister Winifred and team. Thank you. We would also like to thank our ancestors who paved the way for us to be here today. I'm a Garifuna man from St. Vincent and the Grenadines by the way of Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and the United States of America. The topic that our ancestors instructed us to discuss today are about the differences between self-determination and autonomia. Abu Ba spoke on it, huh? We're going to elaborate a little bit further, huh? The theme of sovereignty and independence of African states is quite apropos based on what's happening in West Africa and what's called the Sahel states, including Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. We were given this subject by the ancestors before Captain Ibrahim brought up Burkina Faso to the present state that it is in right now. Please keep in mind that Burkina Faso gained its independence from France on August the 5th, 1960, approximately 65 years ago. And autonomy did not cause this movement to come alive after 65 years. It was the audacious act of self-determination. The sovereignty and the independence of African states has everything to do with knowing the differences between the impact of self-determination compared to the impact of autonomy. Let's start by defining self-determination and autonomy from a geopolitical point of view. But we want to encourage each one of you to ask yourself this question: which power does our Kebulan state nation have? The power of self-determination or the power that comes with autonomia? You could Google this for yourself. We're not here to educate any of you. This is being recorded for posterity, so this is for posterity. According to Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, self-determination has multiple definitions. The right of a country or region and its people to be independent and choose their own government and political system. The right or ability of a person to control their own fate. And international law states that self-determination denotes the legal right of people to desire their own destiny and the international order. Self-determination is a core principle of international law, arising from customary international law, but also recognized as a general principle of law and enshrined in a number of international treaties as a right of all peoples. The scope and purpose of the principle of self-determination has evolved significantly in the 20th century. In the early 1900s, the international support grew for the right of all people to self-determination. This led to successful succession movements during and after World War I, II, and laid the groundwork for the decolonization in the 1960s. Again, Abu spoke on that. Contemporary notions of self-determination usually distinguish between internal and external self-determination, suggesting that self-determination exists on a spectrum. International self-determination, internal self-determination may refer to various political and social rights. By contrast, external self-determination refers to full legal, again, I will spoke on this, refers to full legal independence, secession, for the given people from the larger political legal state. Now, what is autonomy? According to Oxford Dictionary of Politics and International Relations, autonomy is defined as self-government, the ability to act according to one's own direction, and a prerequisite for rational human action. Autonomy can be applied to individuals, groups, or institutions. For example, a country, a region, or an organization can have autonomy, meaning it has the freedom to govern itself independently. In political philosophy, autonomy is a goal that can be realized through political means. This requires the states to protect people from interference with their autonomy, ensure the availability of sufficient resources, and foster the mental abilities necessary for autonomy. But autonomy is based on the Westminster government system. The Westminster model is the parliamentary system of government established in the former British colonies upon gaining independence from the United Kingdom. The model is based on British Constitution and their Westminster government. The model has been credited for bringing stable governments to the former colonies. Therefore, a country gaining its independence did not free the nation from the grasp of the power structure. Example, to date, we have Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Haiti, Belize, West Papua New Guinea. What holds them hostage to colonial influence is autonomy, which is law. And autonomy does not allow the right to exercise self-determination. In 2021, Barbados transitioned from a parliamentary constitutional monarchy to a parliamentary republic, becoming the world's newest republic. The country formally ended its ties with the British Crown and the Queen, according to AP News. While Barbados remains a member of the Commonwealth, it is now led by a president with a prime minister remaining head of government. But Barbados decided to remain a member of the Commonwealth of Nations despite becoming a republic because in 2007, a Commonwealth realm transitioning to a republic had to reapply for membership, which is no longer the case. Now, West Papua New Guinea. It was during my community services of West Papua New Guinea in the Pacific Islands that I learned about the differences between autonomy and self-determination. In May of 1963, there was a de facto transfer of power from the Dutch government to the Indonesian government in West Papua New Guinea. The peoples of West Papua were granted autonomy. Since that time, over 600,000 Papuans have been assassinated by the colonial powers of Indonesia. Yes, it's quite apropos that General Assimi Goïta of Mali, General Tachini of Niger, and others like Ambassador Arikana Quo have been called by the ancestors in this moment, and each one of us have been called at this moment by the ancestors. Based on what we have learned about autonomy and self-determination, we're asking African youth at home and abroad to delve deeply into the two international laws. We're asking Black leadership, Pan-African thinking leadership to delve into the differences between these two international laws. The leaders of the Sahel states in Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso are exercising self-determination, and we invite every nation to follow suit. In closing, a man or a woman who don't know history or his or her history is like a tree without roots. Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. Ubuntu, Awurabundi, Amadununi.
Thank you very much, Trevor Garibaldi Palacio. And you've outlined the complexities of decolonization, emphasizing the distinction between autonomy and self-determination. So thank you very much. And we give Trevor Garibaldi Palacio a round of applause. And I want to throw in as representative of the Garifuna people. And now we have heard it all, and we have had a very sumptuous feast, and it's your turn now to ask questions. And already I have some questions before me, and Mr. Benoit, you're first on the list. How have some foreign economic interests shaped or undermined Lumumba's ideals in the Congo?
Well, foreign economy and Western interest, to name it, absolutely undermined Lumumba's ideals in the Congo. It has done it for decades, using Mobutu as a puppet for their own interest. There is no doubt that the assassination of Lumumba and his ideal was organized in order to serve the colonial project. The secession of Katanga, which happened 11 days after the independence of Congo, was organized by Belgium with the support and for the interest of the Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, that the colonial company was exploiting Congolese copper since the decades. They didn't want Lumumba to share the richness of Congo, and especially the copper, with the Congolese people. And Lumumba was arrested and sent to death to Katanga by the will of the Belgian government and the Belgian king. It has been proven. So the whole project of this assassination was to use corruption to undermine Lumumba's vision. And it worked. But this is not the end of the story. A brighter future is still possible, and it only depends on the political will of the Congolese themselves. That's what I wanted to highlight in my talk today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And the next question is to Sheba Montserrat. And the question is, who is the prime audience of your Watch Your Mouth campaign? Is it descendants of the so-called self-liberators and Africans worldwide, or is it an indiscriminate audience?
Definitely an indiscriminate audience, because if you start listening now, you'll notice that most people will say they took slaves from Africa. Most people will say, will loosely use the language. So it's really to everybody to watch our mouth and think twice about what we're saying. It's for everybody.
Thank you very much. And the next question is to Ms. Abua. Leveraging funds from the diaspora when in many countries they don't have voting rights, won't that be hard? And even if remittances are a reality, what do you suggest through a fantastic idea, though a fantastic idea, this may be hard. No?
Okay, thank you. Well, yes, it's a great point, and there are definitely challenges, but we need to understand that diaspora engagement is not really about politics. It's about trust, it's about opportunity. People's remittances continue to flow, not because people have voting rights, but because they care about their families and they care about their communities. And that emotional and financial connection is very powerful. So we need to think about how we shift it from informal giving to strategic investment. And for that to happen, governments must step up. They must create transparent and credible vehicles for diaspora investment. So think diaspora bonds, health investment funds. We've seen it in Nigeria. Last year, the government did a diaspora fund where people in diaspora were able to invest in the Nigerian economy over a period of 5 years. And it was very successful. It was sold out. So yes, it's hard, but the alternative is harder, leaving billions of dollars in potential untapped. So it's difficult, but it's doable if we think through it strategically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this next one is for you. No, I'm sorry. This is for Dr. Raka. Why so little parallels between Asian, South American states and African states regarding statehood after independence?
Thank you very much. So I will actually leave out South America simply because the comparisons, will be much more difficult and to take too long. But the Asian comparisons are interesting. And there's a lot of literature in the development studies literature, economics about Asian economies, African economies. There's famous comparisons between Nigeria and Malaysia, for example, in the 1960s, that the economies were more or less the same. But of course, fast forward 30 years, they are quite different. So there's a lot of actual economic comparisons between Asia and Africa. And by Asia, I mean like Southeast Asia in particular, okay? But you find very little political comparisons. And I think this is where I find it very interesting. And I think the question is extremely insightful. It will take me way long to really delve into all this, but I have worked actually on Indonesia, and I'm familiar with that space as well. So fundamentally, or one way to really think of the differences between African countries and Asian countries in terms of development is political development. And I don't mean to put Africans down. There are some similarities. Granted, of course, African countries have far much more bigger problems in terms of the colonial nature of the state, the multi-ethnic and so forth, but there are some similarities a little bit, okay? Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia in particular, those are multi-ethnic countries. In Singapore, they have like 3 official ethnicities, Malays, Chinese, and Indians. In Malaysia, they have, the Malays and many other minorities. In Indonesia, they have very complex ethnic diversity. Granted, of course, they are a majority Muslim country. But here's what I will say, and this is the point I want to make. If you look at all those 3 Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, they have done something deliberately to create a nation, to forge a national identity out of the people. In other words, they have moved past this idea of actually electoral democracy. They have actually designed, countries that creates kind of like a national identity in some ways. And that goes on a long way to create political stability and so forth. It doesn't solve all the problems, but you can only have an economy if you actually have a working political system. If you don't have a working political system, forget economy. Because we saw this in Ivory Coast. You can have an economy when you have bad politics, war can come and destroy everything. So really the political foundation is extremely important. Now, Tanzania is the only country that I can really think about in Africa that have actually gone a long way in creating this kind of idea of nation. Tanzania is not a perfect country, but in many ways, Tanzania is one of the most one of the countries in Africa have the most potential for peace compared to most other countries. And it is not by accident, because in Tanzania, they have deliberately formed this idea of a nation through, Nyerere's ideas. So what I'm saying is that there's an idea that, for the post-colonial state or the colonial state, you have to forge a nation. And I'll give you some few examples, and I'll stop here. In Indonesia, they deliberately created a language, the Bahasa Indonesia, going back to the 40s, 1950s, and they created the governance principle in Indonesia of they have principles of actual inclusion and inclusivity. Again, it's not perfect, but trust me, Indonesia is far more complex than any African country. Much bigger, more ethnicities, most everything, islands, but it's far much more stable and far much more organized than most African countries. In Malaysia, they had a deal. The majority, Malay people, and the Chinese in particular, the Chinese were denied citizenship, but they controlled the economy. And for some reason, they called the Malay the Benpotura. Like they created this deal when somehow the Malay people will control politics and the Chinese will gain citizenship, and kind of like it's a kind of constitutional model of governance. Kind of it's working so far. In Singapore, they designed settlements and housing deliberately to actually foster ethnic inclusion and cohabitation. So in summary, what I'm saying is that the difference is that those countries that actually have gone a very deep thought about the nation, about inclusive politics. They have done a very deep thinking about the nature of the political system to arrive at actually the political system to create cohesion. That is really what African countries are lacking. In Africa, we either move from dictatorship that is civilian or military dictatorship, or fake democracy. When we say, come here and vote, one person, one vote, and whoever wins takes the power. That's nonsense. How will I actually accept election results or play by the rules when I know, as Nnamdi Azikiwe said in Nigeria, just by the population distribution, you know whether you lose or you win. Who is going to follow election rule based on that? So, I think that's really the answer to the question here. I think you have to mold a nation out of a country for you to get the political stability. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's another question. What should be the first concrete step to reclaim the ground lost by the US in its strategy to look inward and sacrifice its place on the global stage? Do you want me to repeat the question?
That's for who?
That's for you.
Please repeat it again.
What should be the first concrete step to reclaim the ground lost by the US in its strategy to look inward and sacrifice its place on the global stage?
This is really a question for the United States. I'm here. I think I want to take mostly a pass on answering the US question because this is but let me reframe a little bit again. If the question here, I think Martin can speak more maybe to this. If the question really is what Africans can do to actually gain leverage vis-a-vis contemporary politics that is happening, I think that's a very important question, and I'll pass that really mostly to Martin. But my short answer is that you only create leverage when you create actually proper functioning states within your country, and that's it means like we have to go back to sovereignty of the people, and we have to actually create inclusive political systems. Then we can gain stability, and then you can gain better governance, and then your resources then will mean something, and then you can gain leverage.
Thank you very much. And the next question is to Dr. Ejidike. How do we best seize this opportunity when Africa struggles to come together as one on so many issues?
I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think that the critical thing here is to activate the African Union as a coordinating voice. If Africa is able to go out to the world as one unit, a lot of things will change. It will be difficult for African countries, to bilaterally deal with Europe, bilaterally deal with the United States. How can Rwanda, for example, or even Nigeria, negotiate trade with the United States? You see that, despite what President Trump is talking about, US isolationism, he's breaking continents apart. He's trying to negotiate, not with the whole of the EU. He's trying to negotiate within the different countries. He's trying to negotiate with African countries at the bilateral level. We need to see as Africans, the African countries need to see that, our leaders need to see that there is more strength in unity. Even if it's difficult, I understand the difficulties of having the AU to coordinate the whole of Africa, but at least we have already regional blocks. Those regional blocks can begin to act as the building blocks, which were what they were meant to do initially, as the building blocks for a single union. You know, that's really very important. I think what is important is to create that critical mass, to engage the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Nweke, if we uphold Thomas Sankara's advocacy of non-payment of debt to preserve life, what would we do with leaders who simply share borrowed funds among themselves and ignore the purpose for which they were assigned?
Okay. Well, I think in this case, again, that's the point that we talk about, you know, corruption. In my presentation, I talked about the challenges of the national context, the challenges of institutions, the weakness of national institutions, and the question about elite capture. You know, these are issues we need to address. If we don't address those issues, not much will be done. The foreign policy is usually an outgrowth of domestic policy. If you don't have a strong domestic base, your foreign policy cannot be effective. Your foreign policy cannot reinforce anything at the national level. I mean, and it's very important to also realize, I mean, there's, you know, Napoleon lived centuries ago, but there was something he said that was very important in terms of the world, that there are two things, that there are two powers in the world, the power of the sword and the power of the mind. And that eventually at the end, the power of the mind overcomes the power of the sword. So what we need to do as a continent is to realize that we have to develop our capacity and to work, you know, as one continent in order to confront and face the world. There's really no reason why Africa, the richest continent in terms of natural resources, should be the poorest in terms of the quality of life of its citizenry.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Benoit, here's a question for you, and I was told that it's slightly off topic, but could you maybe speak of how Rwanda and Kagame has played a role in taking the attention away from whatever remains of Lumumbism?
I wouldn't say it's off topic, but it's probably too complex to be answered in a short time like I do have right now. It should be all conference by itself. But let's be honest, we can for sure blame Kagame for the destabilization of Congo during these last 30 years. But he is not the reason why Lumumbism is not alive anymore in Congo. It's a Congolese issue, and I believe that the Congolese political class should ask themselves that question. Why did they let this ideal disappear? I'm not here to give any lessons to anyone, right? I would hate to do that, and I would hate to do it. But I know Congo enough, and I have so many Congolese friends, journalists, people working for civil society, intellectuals. They know more than I do how important it is for Congo, for the future of Congo, to go back to Lumumba's ideal, to set the path for a bright future. You see how this country, the huge richness of this country, I mean, the richness of the soil, the minerals, but also of the people. This country could be so important for the whole continent. I mean, it's a responsibility people have in Congo to go back to Lumumba. And as I said, Western countries will not help So it has to be done from there. You can blame Kagame, but we should all look in front of our own toes before we speak.
I want to thank you, and I know that you have to rush off now because you have an important appointment. Can Lumumbism be revived as a meaningful political philosophy in the 21st century? And you
I
probably
believe
give
so.
us a short answer.
Yes, I believe so. Well, you all know that better than I do, how important it could be for Africa, because it was also a Pan-Africanist vision. But let me just tell you something I didn't had the time to mention already. You would be surprised how Lumumba is still alive in Belgium. For the new generation of Belgians, Lumumba has become a symbol of a fight against racism. Racism we still face in this society, in Belgium, from where I speak. Lumumba is more alive here than ever. So Belgium assassinated Lumumba, but now he's part of our own political culture, and some new generations are looking at him, at his vision, to shape what Belgium could be in the future. And that is something that all give us hope. I believe so.
Thank you, and thank for your participation.
I will leave you now, but thank you all.
Thank
nice
you.
to meet
Thank
you
you
all.
very much. Thank
My
you
pleasure to
very,
be with
very
you.
much.
Goodbye.
Thank you so
Bye.
very much, Benoit. Thank you.
There's a question here for Dr. Ba. You talked about scaling up effective health taxes. How realistic is it in an environment where unemployment is at its highest level?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. So I think, well, first and foremost, I mean, you can put the tax rate at a penny, so that, but I think we have to ask really what is tax? What is a tax? And what role does it play, in the political system? Okay. So when you think of actually countries or states, in every country is a territory, and in there's a state, which is the political authority, and then there are the people. And the people and the state are not the same thing. So it works when there's a contract. Again, European philosophers have spoken a lot about this, but also we can think of it in an African way. There's a contract, that is to say, those with power and the people. And typically those in power, actually, they want resources, money, armies and so forth. And in return, the people also want something, stability, guidance, and so on and so forth. Okay, so a tax is just part of that contract in a normal operating society or state. That is to say, those in authority actually extract resources, and in return, they actually provide services. So a tax can actually be used as a way to hold people accountable. Now, take two scenarios. One is that you have an oppressive regime which goes like colonial systems. They just go and extract taxes by force, and they don't give anything in return to the people. If that is the case, at some point the people will revolt, because if you come to me and take my money and don't give me anything, you keep on doing that. At some point, I will revolt. Now, the ideal scenario, of course, I mean, you take taxes and you give in return. So my point about taxes really is that it's very difficult to actually have an oppressive system in a system where you have taxation, because the people will not stand for it. Okay, the people will not allow their money to be extracted without actually getting something in return. So I see tax really from a political standpoint, as opposed to purely an economic standpoint, as a way of actually restoring the balance between those in power and the people. How much tax you put on, and that that's an economic matter. I mean, everybody can pay tax. Actually, by the way, everybody pays taxes anyway. It doesn't matter how poor you are. Sales taxes are there everywhere. So it's not just income tax. I mean, there's a variety of tax, import taxes. The poorest people in Africa pay taxes. Okay, imported goods are taxed and they paid. So you cannot be poor enough not to pay taxes. Okay, but I think the key point I was making there is that the states in Africa actually have revenue, and that revenue is coming from extraction. And the people have no leverage in that, because when the state actually collects rent from minerals, Guinea, bauxite, you take any country, and they get a small penny from the companies. But small pennies can mean $5 billion, $6 billion. That is enough. That is enough for an oppressive regime to buy weapons, feed the military, and maintain the political class and oppress the people. So, in a sense, the mineral rent actually allows for the government to be unaccountable. And this is again, part of what I call like radical thinking, that we have to really rethink the relation between the state and the citizen. And if we can find a way to remove mineral rents, mineral resources from the operations of government to more development things and focus on taxation, then you can change the relation between the people and those who are oppressed and the government. Because let's be honest, I mean, African people in power in Africa, they are not really, most of them, I mean, or you can say all of them, they are really not good, accountable leaders. I mean, they are corrupt people. I mean, all the ones that I know are corrupt people.
Thank you. There's a follow-up question, and there's a question as to why should I still have a private health insurance when I've already given the government my quota of contributions? You may have covered it in your answer already, but just a little bit more on that. Are you hearing me?
That's for me?
Yes, there's a follow-up question.
Oh. Well, so again, I mean, I think our colleague here spoke about the question about trying to build kind of like health funds, and so I think some of that was there. But my point about taxation is not necessarily specific to any particular I guess project like health in this case. But the idea is that if you think of actually how you run the state, whether for security, for whatever it is, and so that's what my reference. And actually, for in the model that I'm talking about, health can actually be a different thing, because, for example, in the model that I'm talking about, you can use natural resources, the revenue from natural resources, to build hospitals, to build infrastructure, roads. So that's so what my model really is to make rents from mineral resources focus on development things as opposed to running government. So actually, in fact, if you look at some of the World Bank and IMF development plans for most African countries, they explicitly actually identify natural resources as a bridge or as a resource that African countries can use to actually develop their countries. So that's one of the very few things that we have, natural resources. So use it. But unfortunately, it has been used to run governments, which is not the same thing as actually creating development. I'm saying use revenues from natural resources to do actual development projects, things, build roads, build schools, build hospitals, and so forth. If you want to run a government, tax the people, and then you can deal with the people.
Thank you very much. And at this point, if there are no other questions, I want to thank every contributor, everyone who has done a presentation, and also thank the people who raised the questions, and for you and for the answers that were given. And at this time, give yourself a round of applause. I like that sort of stuff. I just think that you need to, applaud yourself, because the work must have been tremendous that you put into all of this. And then I need to say that offer an explanation for Professor Lumumba's absence. And he's tried to log on, but he couldn't. And but there'll be another occasion for him to join in. And so we want to thank him for all the efforts that he has made in the event that he come across some of what we're saying here elsewhere. And oh dear, there's still another question. Question to Trevor, Mr. Palacio. Is the process of self-determination for the diaspora different from the ones national populations are undergoing? Trevor.
Thank you for whomever may have asked that question. There's no difference. The process is the same. The leadership simply needs to understand the difference between autonomy and the impact of autonomy on the nation, and the difference between self-determination and the impact of self-determination on the nation. And the leaders, once they grasp that, and if they want to form a government that is self-sustaining, and that's what self-determination means, such things as, again, taxation has to come into play. There just has to be a process, but we would say that in our experience, we've learned that the African struggle at home and abroad is local, regional, national, transnational, international. But the application of self-determination is the same on all levels. It's simply about understanding it and applying it.
Thank you. And there's a follow-up question. Is full emancipation following the Barbados model, possible for other countries of the Commonwealth? Or are they held down by colonialist relationships? And tomorrow is Commonwealth Day.
It's up to, salute President and Captain Ibrahim Traore and the Sahel states. They didn't ask for consent. You can't ask for consent when you're talking about freedom, right? You can't ask for consent when you're talking about self-determination. But the reason, again, autonomy exists is to throw you off, to make you believe, to make you think that you actually have power, but at the end of the day, you must ask for consent, right? So to answer that question best, any Jamaica could do it. We mentioned Jamaica, Haiti. Haiti is right now in the process of trying to remove itself. They've been taxed for France, charged them reparations for having to leave Haiti. And they've been paying this reparations, billions of dollars, right? So locals there are taking it upon themselves to say, enough is enough. And that's what has happened in the Sahel states. So we would say, yes, any member of the African diaspora where there is a leadership who has integrity, a leadership that understand that they're here on divine purpose. And we're not talking about religion here. We're talking about divine purpose. They can do it.
Thank you very much. And so again, we are at the end of this section. And I think that there are some innovators who are going to be introduced to us. And this might be where I leave. Oh dear, what am I being told now? So yes, this is it. I think this is the end of this section. There are some innovators to be introduced, and I'm waiting a word on how that is to happen.
Hi, my name is Ejikeme Patrick Nwosu, Nigerian scientist with background in industrial chemistry and organic chemistry. I'm the founder and CEO of Lumos Laboratories Nigeria Limited, a private research and development company with much emphasis on conversion of waste into clean energy. And this with us here is our flagship product called hybrid Petroleum Flask Reactor that converts urine, wastewater or water into hydrogen-rich gases, which can be blended to generate electricity in internal combustion engine or using fuel cell. This is a simple model of a fuel cell that can be used. The way it works is that the feed, urine, wastewater or water is introduced into this inlet chamber, and when it gets into this reactor with our activators inside, gets converted into hydrogen-rich gases. These gases, as already mentioned, can be used to generate clean energy. The byproducts are harvested and collected to use to produce our patented, trademarked fire retardant paint, which can be used for eco-friendly painting that quench fire. So, what makes our reactor different from what is obtainable in almost everywhere in the world is that it is the first or one of its kind in the world that does the conversion of wastewater, urine or water into hydrogen-rich gases by chemical reaction or by electrolysis or by both processes. The first process I explained is by conversion via chemical reaction, where the urine and other wastewater and stuff gets contact with our activators and we can have our hydrogen-rich gases. Another approach is by use of electrolysis. We have electrodes, anode and cathode, at the top of the reactor, where we can use to initiate electrolysis by introducing electric current at the top of the reactor to break down the wastewater, water, urine into hydrogen-rich gases, which can be harvested and used for energy generation. This is the thermometer to measure the reaction temperature and the pressure gauge to measure the pressure of the gas produced. This is a simple one that can be used at in homes. We have also delivered this project and installed in multiple locations in Nigeria. And we have our functional prototype plant that is over 10 years in operation.
Hi, I'm Tijani, founder of Hyperculture. We make organic farming easier with the use of natural fertilizers, hydroponics, and cocoa-based products. Let me show you how we do it. We turn coconut husks into cotton mix, cocoa pits, cocoa chips, and cocoa fiber. This helps plants grow better. We make powerful organic fertilizers with fish, bone, banana peels, and compost. They feed plants naturally and improve soil health. We also design hydroponic systems that help plants grow without soil. Our product works for farmers and home gardeners. Whether you're growing in soil or hydroponic, we help your plants grow stronger and healthier. At Hyperculture, we believe in natural, sustainable farming. If you want to grow better, reach out to us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that is Abdoulaye Tijani, the founder of Hyperculture, a brand dedicated to sustainable agriculture and organic farming solutions. With a passion for soil health, plant nutrition, and eco-friendly farming, Tijani has developed a range of innovative products, including organic fertilizers, hydroponic systems, and premium cocoa-based growing mediums. Under his leadership, Hyperculture has helped farmers and gardeners achieve healthier planet growth while promoting sustainable practice. Through research, innovation, and hands-on experience, Tijani continues to advocate for a greener future in agriculture. And let's give Tijani a round of applause. And I must apologize for not introducing our earlier presenter. So I'm telling you about him. Ejikeme Patrick Nwosu is the founder and director of research at Lomas Laboratories Nigeria Limited, where he develops innovative solutions to turn waste into clean energy. With over 12 years of experience and 7 invention patents, he invented the Thai club luminous method, which converts wastes, urine, feces, animal waste, etc. into hydrogen-rich gases for electricity and cooking. His work also produced byproducts like organic fertilizers and fire retardant paints. Under his leadership, Lumos Labs has implemented waste to energy projects in schools, correctional facilities, farms, event centers, etc. across Nigeria, providing clean alternatives to fossil fuels. His contribution to clean innovation technologies have earned him and Lumos Labs various recognition and award. Passionate about sustainability and local solution, Ejikime is committed to creating sustainable energy solutions that empower communities and support a cleaner Africa. So a round of applause, please, for our young inventors. And I closed the program earlier. I think I'm getting tired. So right now we are heading towards the close. And at this point, the introduction and the CEO and founder of the Africa Forum, we ask Mrs. Winifred Oluko-Gela to come forward.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, honorable speakers, honorable moderator, and our honorable audience attendees. We thank you all for making 2025 Nzuko Africa Week celebration another success. Our speakers, we really sincerely thank you from the bottom of our heart for taking time, for making time to do this with us. You are very distinguished in your different areas of work, and it's really a pleasure for us to have people of your caliber every year to help us to look for ways to get the Africa we want. We say a big thank you. And to our attendees, a very big thank you, because without you, it's not complete. We apologize sincerely for the absence of Professor Pierre Lumumba, who was here struggling to log in. We did it together for over 30 minutes and nothing was working, and he couldn't just sit at the other end and watch. So sincere apologies for the technical glitch. Today is the virtual edition that's coming to a close. Tomorrow we'll have the physical edition, where this year we're introducing for the first time an awards event, because Africans were not very good at sharing ourselves. We wait for people to recognize us and then we clap. So fortunately, some Africans are stepping up, because there were a lot of Africans. And when we say Africans in Africa Forum, we mean the continentals and the descendants and friends of Africa as well. So we are saying we are joining the Africans who are patting our people on the back and saying, well done for the things you're doing, so that other people will emulate that. We thank you so much. And for people around Paris or around France, you are welcome tomorrow to our physical edition of Africa Week. Once again, thank you so very much. My brothers and my sisters, we sincerely appreciate you. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you, Winifred.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Zambe nakomitunaka o Yahweh